The sun hung low over the dusty plains of Eldora, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. In a forgotten corner of the world, where hope was as scarce as rain, a girl named Lila stood silently at the edge of a rickety market stall, her bare feet caked with dirt. She was deaf, her world a silent symphony of gestures and glances, and she was about to be traded for a donkey. The crowd around her buzzed with murmurs, but Lila's eyes were fixed on the horizon, unaware of the deal that would change her life forever. She didn't know the man who bartered for her own not just the donkey, but the entire town, and with it, the power to break or rebuild her world. Lila was 16, with chestnut hair that fell in tangles down her back and eyes that held a quiet fire. Born deaf, she'd learned to read lips and faces, catching fragments of the world's cruelty in the sneers of her stepfather, Amos. He was a wiry man with a heart as dry as the fields, who saw Lila as a burden since her mother died 5 years ago. To him, she was a mouth to feed, a problem to solve. The market in Eldora was his chance to be rid of her. "A donkey's worth more than a girl who can't hear," he'd muttered to a neighbor, not caring that Lila could see the words form on his lips. She'd stood there, her hands trembling, as the crowd parted and a stranger approached. The man was Gideon Holt, a name that carried weight in Eldora. Tall, with silver-streaked hair and a face carved by time, he was the town's unspoken king. He owned the general store, the saloon, the bank. Every brick and board in Eldora answered to him. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, landed on Lila, and something flickered in them, not pity, but curiosity. "She's strong enough to work," Amos said, his voice oily. "Take her, and the donkey's yours." Gideon's gaze shifted to Lila, who stared back, unflinching. She couldn't hear the deal, but she felt the weight of it in the way Amos avoided her eyes. Gideon nodded once, and the donkey was led away. Lila was his. The first challenge came that night, as Lila was led to Gideon's sprawling estate on the edge of town. The house was a fortress of stone and timber, its windows glowing like eyes in the dusk. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old money. Lila, clutching a tattered shawl, was shown to a small room by a housekeeper named Mara, a woman with kind eyes and calloused hands. Mara signed slowly, her fingers hesitant but clear. "You're safe here." Lila's heart thudded. Safe? She'd never known the word. Her stepfather's home had been a cage of neglect, or her deafness was a curse, not a trait. But Mara's hands spoke a language Lila understood, and for the first time, she felt seen. Gideon, however, was a mystery. He watched Lila from a distance, his face unreadable. She was put to work in the kitchens, scrubbing pots and hauling water, tasks that tested her strength but not her spirit. The other workers whispered about her, their words lost to her ears but not her eyes. "Why'd he take her?" they'd say, their lips curling. "She's useless, can't even hear orders." Lila kept her head down, but her mind raced. She noticed everything, the way Gideon lingered at the edge of the kitchen, the way he studied her hands as they worked, the way he never spoke to her directly. She began to wonder if she'd traded one cage for another. The turning point came a month later, during a storm that shook Eldora's foundations. Rain lashed the town, and the river swelled, threatening to flood the fields that fed everyone. Gideon's workers scrambled to save the crops, but chaos reigned. Lila, unnoticed in the frenzy, saw a gap in the levee that no one else had. She couldn't shout, couldn't call for help, but she acted. Grabbing a shovel, she waded into the mud, her small frame battling the current to pile stones and earth against the breach. Hours later, soaked and shivering, she stood as the levee held. The workers stared, stunned, and Gideon, watching from the ridge, saw her for the first time not as a traded girl, but as a force. That night, Gideon called her to his study. Mara translated, her hands steady as Gideon spoke. "You saved the fields," he said, his voice low. "Why?" Lila's hands moved fiercely, her signs sharp with emotion, "Because it mattered." Gideon leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You're not what I expected," he said. He revealed a truth that shook her. He hadn't bought her to work her to death. He'd seen her in the market, small but unbowed, and recognized a spark he'd lost long ago. His own daughter, deaf like Lila, had died years before, and he'd been searching for a way to make amends ever since. Lila was his chance, not to replace his daughter, but to right a wrong he couldn't undo. The revelation shifted something in Lila. She began to see Gideon not as a master, but as a man haunted by grief. Yet trust was hard won. She challenged him, signing questions that Mara translated. "Why me? Why now? Gideon admitted he didn't know if he could give her a home, but he could give her a purpose. He offered to teach her to read and write, skills her stepfather had denied her. Lila hesitated, her pride warring with her hunger to learn. Finally, she nodded, and a new chapter began. The next challenge was within herself. Learning to read was like unlocking a door she hadn't known existed. Gideon hired a tutor, a gentle woman named Clara who knew sign language and patience. Lila struggled, her fingers clumsy with a pen, her mind wrestling with letters that danced on the page. There were nights she cried, feeling stupid, feeling broken. But Clara's steady hands and Gideon's quiet presence kept her going. One evening, she wrote her name for the first time, the letters shaky but hers. Gideon framed the paper, hanging it in his study. "This is yours," he said through Mara. "No one can take it." Word of Lila's transformation spread through Eldora. The townsfolk, once dismissive, began to see her differently. She wasn't just the deaf girl anymore, she was the one who'd saved the fields, the one who could read the ledgers in Gideon's store faster than his clerks. But not everyone was pleased. Amos, her stepfather, returned, demanding her back. "She's mine," he spat, his face red with greed. He'd heard Gideon was investing in her, and he wanted a cut. The confrontation in the town square was electric, the crowd holding its breath. Lila, standing beside Gideon, signed her defiance, "I belong to no one." Gideon stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "She's free. Leave, or you'll answer to me." Amos slunk away, and the crowd cheered, not for Gideon, but for Lila. The final challenge was Lila's own fear of trusting, of believing she deserved more than a life of scraps. Gideon offered her a choice, stay as his ward, or leave with enough money to start anew. She wrestled with the decision, her heart torn between the safety of Eldora and the unknown beyond. In the end, she chose to stay, not because she needed Gideon, but because she'd found a family in him, Mara, and Clara. She began teaching sign language to the children of Eldora, her hands weaving stories that needed no sound. The town, once a place of dust and despair, became a home where her silence was a strength. As the sun sets over Eldora, picture Lila standing on the ridge where she once saved the fields, her eyes bright with purpose. She's no longer the girl traded for a donkey, but a woman who rewrote her story. And to you, watching this tale unfold, know this, your voice, whether it's heard or signed, can change the world. Like Lila, you are enough, and your story is yours to write. Let it be one of courage, of heart, and of hope that lights even the darkest corners.